The cop thought she was just a black woman he could threaten and take to a motel to serve him, until she walked into the courthouse and ruined his career. In just the next few minutes, you will witness the whole thing. What happened next shook the nation. The flashing red and blue lights of police cars cut through the thick Florida night, their flickering lights reflecting on the wet asphalt like an ominous warning. The sky was heavy with the smell of rain, mixed with the croaking of frogs on the side of the road. But everything froze when a sound came from the police car behind them. Driver of the black car, pull over to the right immediately. Lieutenant Sanaa Murphy exhaled, her breath slow and steady. She looked at the screen in front of her. It was exactly midnight. She flicked her signal before swerving into the emergency lane, the wheels rolling slowly, before coming to a stop. Little did the policeman know that he was blocking the path of the longest-serving astronaut in orbit. With 371 grueling days on the International Space Station. And she was on her way to the White House, so she wouldn't miss out on receiving a medal from the president tomorrow morning. And yet, at this moment, it felt as though gravity itself had conspired to drag her into an entirely different struggle. Then, a sharp rap on the driver's side window yanked her from her thoughts. Her fingers twitched, instinctively brushing the fabric of her simple white T-shirt as she rolled the window down. Sanaa's eyes locked onto the hard, appraising stare of Officer Waylon Cruz. His uniform was pristine, pressed to a perfection that contrasted sharply with the tension in his posture. The golden gleam of his badge caught the light, a symbol of authority that he clearly wielded with confidence. "License and registration," he commanded, his voice flat, devoid of the usual politeness. In a split second, Sanaa's hands moved slowly, her pulse steady. "May I ask why I'm being stopped, officer?" Her voice, though calm, carried the weight of quiet defiance. Cruz didn't answer right away. He took the papers from her hand, keeping them out of reach, as he glanced over her car. "The tail light broken," he said, while his flashlight cut through the darkness, scanning her documents. But she knew the taillights were fine. She'd checked them herself before taking this trip. But she figured arguing wouldn't do any good. "This your legal paperwork?" he mused, his lips curling at the edges. "Have you received your deportation papers yet?" Immediately, Sanaa's fingers clenched into her palms, but her face remained expressionless. She said, "This is not my responsibility. If you have been trained in the police force, you should know this is legal paper, right?" Cruz let out a dry chuckle, a sound devoid of warmth. "That's so." He drummed his fingers against the doorframe, then took a half-step back, step out of the vehicle. She inhaled deeply, keeping her grip on the steering wheel for a moment longer. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" A flicker of irritation darkened his features. "Ma'am," I said, "step out of the vehicle." Now, her gut twisted. Years of training had honed her instincts, and every fiber of her being screamed that this was a situation she had to navigate with caution. "Officer, I haven't committed a crime. Are you detaining me?" His jaw tightened, a shadow passing over his face. "You're obstructing an investigation. Step out of the damn car." She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. She reached for the handle and pushed the door open. The gravel crunched beneath her sneakers as she straightened, her posture unwavering. The air pressed against her skin, thick and unyielding. Her jet-black hair, cut to shoulder length after her return to Earth, shifted slightly in the warm night breeze. Cruz circled her like a vulture, his eyes scanning her as if she were something to be dissected. "Turn around and place your hands on the roof of your car," he ordered, his voice edged with control. Sana hesitated for a brief second before complying, lifting her hands and pressing her palms flat against the cool metal. The chill seeped into her skin, a stark contrast to the heat prickling at the back of her neck. "Now put your hands behind your back," Cruz continued, stepping closer, his presence looming. Her heart pounded, but her expression remained neutral. "Excuse me? You're under arrest for obstruction." Disbelief surged through her chest. On what grounds? Cruz's smirk widened, failure to comply with a lawful order. The absurdity of the moment weighed heavily on Sana, but before she could form a response, rough hands wrenched her arms back. The cold bite of metal closed around her wrists, the cuffs digging into her skin with unnecessary force. Her jaw clenched, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of reacting. The world shrank to the rhythmic thudding of her heartbeat as he led her toward the patrol car. The headlights cast exaggerated shadows, stretching her silhouette across the pavement. Tall, unbowed, and unbroken. She had spent over a year watching Earth from the cosmos, an untouchable force in the he-heavens. And if this officer thought his badge made him untouchable, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The cold metal of the handcuffs dug into Sana Murphy's wrists, a sharp contrast to the warmth of her skin. She shifted slightly, testing the restraints, but they were fastened too tight, deliberately so. Through the steel mesh partition of the patrol car, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the glass. Her own eyes stared back, calm yet stormy, a mirror of the quiet rage brewing beneath the surface. She had spent over a year in the unforgiving vacuum of space, handling mechanical failures, isolation, and the ever-present possibility of catastrophe. But here, trapped in the back seat of a police cruiser on an empty Florida highway, she was facing a different kind of danger, one that thrived not in the void of space, but in the unchecked power of those who believed themselves above the law. Officer Cruz slid into the driver's seat with an exaggerated sigh, glancing at her in the mirror. "Bet you're feeling pretty small now, huh?" he sneered. "Guess those fancy astronaut medals don't mean much down here, do they?" Sana didn't answer. Silence was a weapon she had learned to wield long ago. But Cruz wasn't one to be ignored. He turned, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "See, people like you think you're untouchable. Think you can talk your way out of anything. But out here, it's a different story." She met his gaze evenly. "I know exactly who I am, and I know my rights." Cruz's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he scoffed. "Yeah? Well, your rights don't mean much when you don't know when to shut up. Maybe next time, you'll learn to listen." The patrol car rumbled to life, and the drive to the station began. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, much like the system she had begun to recognize, one that allowed officers like Cruz to wield their power unchecked. Sana's wrists ached, but she refused to show discomfort. She had been through worse. She had floated in the silence of space, watching Earth spin beneath her. She had felt the immensity of the universe press against her, making her feel smaller than a grain of sand. Yet she had never felt as dehumanized as she did now. The car smoothly passed by a rest stop sign 2 miles away. Cruz suddenly said in a soft voice, "There is a motel there that I often use. I have never slept with an astronaut. If you satisfy me in there, then I will consider letting you go." Sana angrily clenched her fists. "You shut up. These are not the words of a police officer to his citizens." "Okay," Cruz said. You will soon regret refusing a police officer's offer." The car drove for another 30 minutes before seeing the Florida police station sign. Crust turned the wheel to the right. The wheels slowly entered the station. Finally, the car stopped. "Please get out of the car, ma'am," he said in a teasing tone. When Sanaa stepped out of the car, she felt the place was strangely quiet. Just a skeleton crew of officers, their movements sluggish with the weight of the late hour. Cruz barely acknowledged them as he processed her booking, with the efficiency of someone who had done this too many times to count. The other officers didn't care. They barely glanced at her, their indifference reinforcing what she already suspected. This wasn't just about her. This was about a system that allowed men like Cruz to exist unchecked. Cruz led her down the dimly lit corridor, his grip on her arm unnecessarily firm. "Welcome to your new home for the night," he said mockingly, shoving open the door to the holding cell. Sanaa stepped inside, scanning the room with an almost clinical detachment. A metal bench, a toilet in the corner, and the overwhelming staleness of air long since gone uncirculated. It wasn't the worst place she had been forced to endure. She turned to face Cruz, her expression unreadable. Cruz leaned against the bars, his grin widening. "Not so tough now, are you?" Sanaa tilted her head slightly. "You think I'm intimidated by this? I've been in environments where the wrong move could mean certain death. A poorly maintained jail cell doesn't even make the list." The confidence in her voice irked him. His jaw clenched, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty passed through his gaze. Before he could respond, another officer appeared in the doorway, a younger man, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Cruz," the officer hesitated. "You need to take this call. It's from someone pretty high up." Cruz frowned, annoyance flashing across his face, but he pushed off the bars and strode out of the room. The station fell into a tense quiet. Sanaa remained seated, waiting. She had played enough high-stakes games to know when the tide was about to turn. Minutes passed before Cruz returned. His expression had shifted. The arrogance was still there, but beneath it was something else. Unease. He stared at her, his grip tightening around his belt, as if grasping for control he suddenly realized he might not have. "Who the hell are you really connected to?" he muttered, barely concealing his frustration. Sanaa leaned back, the faintest hint of a smirk playing at her lips. "Didn't you say my medals don't mean anything down here?" Cruz exhaled sharply, turning on his heel. He left without another word, the tension in his shoulders betraying the battle waging inside him. He had thought himself untouchable. But the moment he took Sanaa Murphy into his custody, he had made a grave miscalculation. A murmur spread through the courtroom as Cruz sat frozen, his face a mask of barely contained rage and humiliation. He had walked in expecting to assert his dominance once more. Instead, he was the one being judged. Sanaa stood, collecting her things with a quiet grace that spoke volumes. She had known the outcome before she had even stepped into the courtroom. Truth had a way of surfacing, and power misused had a way of collapsing under its own weight. Cruz rose stiffly, his hands clenched at his sides. He forced himself to walk toward the exit, but he could feel the weight of every eye on him. Judgment, contempt, recognition of his downfall. Sanaa watched him go, her expression unreadable. This was not just a victory for her. It was a reckoning for him, and it was far from over. Cruz carried a sad face. He drove back to the station. Just as he stepped through the door, suddenly a deep voice rang out from behind him, Sergeant Waylon Cruz. Cruz heard his name, spoken with unnecessary emphasis, sending a chill down his spine. He turned sharply to find Chief Jacob Baker standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable but his presence imposing. The air seemed to shift, thickening with tension as Cruz swallowed hard. Chief Baker, a man with decades of experience, had built a reputation of unwavering integrity. His words carried weight, and when he spoke, people listened. Without another word, he motioned for Cruz to follow, leading him down the hall to his private office. The door shut with a firm click, sealing them inside. The silence was deafening, stretching unbearably before Baker finally turned to face Cruz. "Sit down," he ordered, his voice measured but firm. Cruz obeyed, sinking into the chair, his shoulders tense. "Explain," Baker demanded, tossing a thick file onto the desk. It slid forward, stopping just before Cruz. The officer hesitated, glancing down at the damning contents, reports, transcripts, video stills. "Chief, I was just following procedure," Cruz started, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "She was resisting." "Resisting?" Baker's eyes narrowed. "She asked you a question?" "That's not resisting." His tone was razor-sharp, slicing through any excuse Cruz had prepared. Cruz shifted uncomfortably. She was disrespectful. Baker's nostrils flared. "So now it's a crime to question authority." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Let's cut the nonsense, Cruz. We both know this isn't an isolated incident. The DA's office is already combing through your records from the last 5 years. You've been sloppy, and now you finally hit the wrong person." The weight of those words sank into Cruz's chest like a stone. What does that mean?" Baker sighed, rubbing his temples before delivering the final blow. "It means you're suspended, effective immediately. And you should get yourself a lawyer, because if that investigation finds what I think it will, you're going to need one." Cruz stiffened. "Suspended? Chief, you can't—" "I can, and I just did," Baker interrupted. "The department isn't covering for you, not anymore. Now pack up your things and get out of my station." Cruz sat frozen, his hands clenched into fists. His world, his authority, his badge, his power was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. For the first time in his career, he wasn't the one in control. Elsewhere in a quiet cafe across town, Sanaa Murphy scrolled through the news on her phone, a calm expression settling over her features. The headlines spoke for themselves. Officer suspended pending investigation. Cruz under scrutiny for pattern of misconduct. Her phone buzzed with a message from her lawyer. "Cruz is done. Expect formal charges soon." She stirred her coffee, taking a slow sip, unsurprised. She had known from the beginning how this would end. Looking out the window at the city moving around her, she allowed herself a small, knowing smile. The battle wasn't over. But today was a victory. Sanaa Murphy stepped out of the cafe, the crisp morning air curling around her like a whispered promise. The golden sunlight spilled across the sidewalk, warming her skin, yet a deeper fire burned within her, one forged in defiance, tempered by resilience. The weight of the past 24 hours had not crushed her. Instead, it had solidified her resolve. She walked with measured purpose, each step an affirmation of her strength, her head held high, her gaze steady. Her phone vibrated in her pocket just as she reached for it. The familiar name on the screen made her pause for half a second before swiping to answer. "Captain." "Murphy." The deep, steady voice carried a note of curiosity beneath its usual command. "How are you holding up?" Sanaa caught her reflection in the glass of a nearby storefront. The woman who stared back at her was the same one who had stared down injustice and refused to blink. Her fingers tightened around the phone. I did what needed to be done. No regrets. A low exhale hummed through the line, a quiet acknowledgement. Good. The Department of Defense has taken notice. There's talk they may ask you to speak publicly about your experience. She turned her head slightly, watching the world move around her. The rhythm of the city pulsed on, unaware, unchanged, pedestrians hurrying past, a cab honking impatiently, the scent of fresh coffee drifting from an open doorway. I never wanted to be a headline, she admitted, her voice soft but firm. You didn't choose this, the captain replied, but it chose you. Whether you like it or not, you're a symbol now. People are watching. A slow inhale expanded her chest, her mind turning over the truth in his words. This wasn't just about her. It had never been just about her. The system had long protected the wrong people, shielding them beneath bureaucracy and blind tradition. Cruz wasn't an outlier. He was a symptom of something deeper, something rooted in power unchecked. She stepped onto the crosswalk, her boots striking the pavement in a steady rhythm. It's bigger than me, she murmured. How many others never get the chance to fight back? How many don't have the voice, the resources, the platform? This isn't just one battle, it's an entire war. The captain remained silent for a beat before responding, his voice weighted with something unspoken. Cruz has never faced real consequences before. You changed that. A flicker of satisfaction ignited in her chest, but she smothered it quickly. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. The mayor's office might reach out soon, the captain continued. They want to commend you for how you handled everything. A wry chuckle escaped her lips before she could stop it. Funny how the system wants to celebrate me now. They should have listened sooner, he admitted, but at least they're listening now. The choice is yours. She considered that for a moment, the offer hanging between them like a fragile thread. Then, with quiet finality, she said, I'll think about it. She ended the call, slipping the phone back into her pocket. As she lifted her eyes, she caught sight of a young mother grasping her son's small hand. The boy giggled, pointing excitedly at something across the street, oblivious to the weight of the world around him. Sanaa watched them, her mind shifting from past to future. This fight had never been solely hers to win or lose. It had always been about something greater, about ensuring that no child, no mother, no innocent person had to face what she had. About making sure that those who misused power would never wield it unchecked again. She inhaled deeply, straightened her shoulders, and stepped forward. The battle was far from over, but today was a victory. Because change didn't come in a single moment. It was built on the voices that refused to be silenced, and Sanaa Murphy would never be silent again. The story ends with Sanaa Murphy's promise. She will never be silent again. What about you? What do you think about Sanaa? Have you ever faced Cruz? Hit the like button and let us know what you think. If you like stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video.